I haven't fucking done this in forever. Recording in progress. Welcome to YouTube. Welcome to internet. Welcome to everything. Everything's going great. It's been a minute. Today I'm joined with DangerZone. It's yours truly, Raddad 2024. We're talking Hiram, Ulysses, Grant, or Hug, as he
Hug.
was as he was termed on the stupid, shitty bullies. Um, yeah, man. 18th
Yeah,
president of the United States of America, served 2 terms, was also the most, I would say, important um, Union general of the Civil War. Could be argued. Maybe you want to give your MVPs out to somebody else. You can make your arguments. Email us, zanzizypodcast@gmail.com. Just don't say Robert E. Lee. Wrong side, brother. Just kidding. It's fine. You can live in your delusions if you want. That's fine.
yeah, he was a good one. This was fun to cover. Uh, he's definitely an MVP in my book. This was the most interesting of all the times you've had me on doing these podcasts and the topics and people that we've covered. I think Grant so far has been the most interesting to me.
I
Just
def
everything about him.
I definitely would agree as far as the time. I was raised to be a little history nerd because of my dad. And we used to watch this program in the 90s on History Channel called Civil War Journal. And specifically, it would kind of like, it was narrated by Danny Glover. So it was like, it was fun that way, but it had this unique kind of storytelling way of explaining like different battles and like different generals. Um, so in one of our first field trips we took together as parent and son, father and son, was to Gettysburg, and ever since then I've been uniquely fascinated with Lincoln, Grant, Sherman,
Buchanan.
uh, um, but in the time period, like this is such a unique. I mean, the Wild West is born. The I was curious. At some point, I did end up Googling if they had toilet paper during this time, and they did, because I heard so many reports of just shitting your life away, um, which is not a fun thing to do. But a lot of guys got the shit flu, and
Everything.
everything.
This is a recurring theme with all the podcasts that we're doing, that everybody dies of dysentery, cholera, malaria, or some other bullshit where it's just, tuberculosis, just horrible all the time, up until the 20th century when modern medicine became widely available.
Yeah, when I mean, I'm shocked too because Grant was close to all of this stuff. I'm always curious, like, are these just is it just like people washing their hands with poop by accident, or just like, you know what I mean?
Well,
Like
he
picking up a
says that.
cup that somebody ralphed in on accident?
Yeah, I mean, like Teddy said in some of the stuff that we read on him in his uh, biography and whatnot. Like, Grant was surrounded by disease his whole life, and he even, you know, his I think it was his time at West Point where he was like he had a really bad cough for a couple years, and he thought he was going to die of TB. But yeah, it's just one of those things growing up in the 1800s and prior to that.
Totally. Totally, totally, totally. I want to mention the book that specifically we reference throughout is Ron Churchnow's Grant Chernow, which is free to Spotify Premium members, which I highly recommend. It's 48 hours long. It's long, but I wouldn't say it's dry. It's super interesting, especially if you're like history dads here and you like, I don't know, just to get a vibe of the time. Like specifically, it feels like it reads like a movie for me listening to it. Because I can kind of visualize everything, especially having seen so many movies based around the Civil War. I kept thinking, and I texted this to you, this would make for an awesome like side B to Gone with the Wind as far as like the other side. Because Gone with the Wind is such a Southern romanticized version of what the Confederacy was like during the time. And no offense to that film, it's an enjoyable film, but it's a work of fiction. Um, and the Union story is fascinating to me, especially from Grant's side of things. As we kind of mentioned, I love Grant. I think he's fascinating. I mentioned that he was the 18th president, but did I mention that he was born in Ohio? What? In April? That's right. This boy is an Ohio boy, a Midwest boy, like yours truly, Raddad 2024. I know it's been a minute since we posted an episode two, so I just want to say hi. We're still alive. We post them when we want to, and that's just the way it is when you run the place. So, uh, but anyway, Ulysses S. Grant. Grant.
Born Hiram, Ulysses Grant, because
Hug.
his mom wanted to give him a big hug.
His mom Hannah was really nice, actually, and it seems like a common thread. Like Teddy had a nice mom. His dad seems a bit like a shitheel. Not that he was like overtly a bad dad. It was just that he was like a businessy guy. And between Jesse, his dad, and Grant, I think Grant is, and a lot of quotes are attributed from him and about him. And specifically, it feels like the sense I got of Grant was he was just your common everyday man who just ended up like running the largest country other than Europe in the known world at the time, like one of the largest countries in the world for two terms, and logistically like was incredible battle tactician. Like he definitely went to West Point and studied and learned a few things about Napoleon, but he was, at least to me, he was an honest man and he wasn't necessarily fond of the press, whereas Napoleon wasn't very fond of the English press. But, anyways, it's one of those times where I feel like I can tangent for days about everything. I mostly what I want to say is that Grant was your bearded IPA drinking podcast starting normal, just white dude. He was an abolitionist. His father was an abolitionist. He was against slavery. All good things. But there are some, and we'll dive into them, and I'll explain them. There are a few like, huh? Uh, he was very fond of the temperance movement of the time, which is like your AAs or your sobriety, but he struggled with kind of a lifelong addiction, as alcohol is a disease, and alcoholism is a disease and should be treated as such when it comes to people who need to get sober. Um, but and there's this whole thing about Order 11, which I'll get into probably in episode two, and I think we're going to be doing three parts on this, so buckle up, folks.
There's a
Adam,
lot to cover.
there is a lot to cover, and I'm going to try. I already said he was born in Ohio, but I didn't say the date and all the hard info. Do you have anything you want to say before we start to through this?
No, I think you hit it. I mean, he kind of fell into a position of importance. I think he always, I guess, longed for some sort of importance because as he as we got to know him through reading and through some of the research that we did,
Mm-hmm.
um, he became bored a lot when he didn't have anything to do,
Mm-hmm.
hence the drinking
Yes.
and
Yep.
whatnot. So,
And it was in the
uh,
service. So I don't think, I mean, as a child, I remember at one point in the book them saying something about like his dad had some sort of like tonic with alcohol in it in his basement, and like he and some friends were like tee hee, and like snake snuck down there and like drank some. But this is they go into the description of the time, like it feels specifically like the overall, like your centralized family unit generally stayed away from spirits like alcohol or anything that was going to cause a tizzy in the community. Like everybody was very puritanical in their views. Like that was what gunslingers did or something down the line. But like um I think overall, like he had a good family. um he as I mentioned, he was born April 27th, 1822 in Ohio. Um, his parents were oh, I want to mention, yes, his full name Hiram, Hiram, Hiram. I didn't know how that was spelled until I found it online. Like I kept picturing it like Hyyrreum or something weird, like Latin. Well, I mean, Ulysses is from like what, Greek, like going back to like pre AD times. His parents were Jesse Root Grant and Hannah Simpson Grant. He let's see. Oh, it was Point Pleasant, Ohio, by the way. Uh, for anybody who's curious, which I've thought about visiting there, which is it's not it's like within a day's drive to get to places like in Ohio, and like even where we've traveled together to see each other in the past. Um so very early on, uh he graduated from West Point in 1843. Do you want to get into his younger life specifically? I mean, we mentioned he was bullied a bit, but for the most part, he was like a C student, C, B ish.
Yeah, I mean, some of his childhood has relevance in his later years.
Okay.
So I mean, so like his father, worked in he was a
Tannery.
tanner.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and he was never into it. He was disgusted by the whole profession. Um, he he wanted to do much more than working with dead animals and corpses and you know doing their hides and whatnot. So I think what I was saying earlier was like he always longed to do something more, and I think that his relationship with his father um, might have been strained a little bit because he didn't want to go into the family business in the tannery.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
His dad was also not a big fan of him joining the service
yeah,
because
yeah,
at the time that wasn't necessarily considered like a smart move. Like it was more like, oh, you start your own business like your pa here. And like, we're gonna be rich. We're gonna live the American dream. We came over here, we're gonna fucking make billions. But
yeah.
but
He,
meanwhile, like he had
yeah,
his hands in a lot of pots too. Jesse did.
yeah, he did. I think the book described him as a schemer.
A bit, yeah, yeah. And you mentioned his disgust with tannery. Like he goes into like he's a this is why immediately I start loving him in the early part of the book, because he's like obviously an animal lover, and like he uh even at a point later, and I'll bring it up again, like his in his courtship with Julia, his future like love, he had like a mock ceremony for her dead bird and like put it in a little casket and had like which is which that to me says a lot about his character. Like,
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like he loves animals. He's an honest guy. He doesn't want to he doesn't want to like essentially get into business because he can't really, he's like George Washington the Legend of Washington, of like the I can't tell a lie type of dude. Like he doesn't. His dad, I think, at one point tries to get him to, because as I mentioned, he loves animals. He's a huge fan of horses and ends up becoming like an incredible like horse rider. And part of that was that he had his dad was like, all right, here's a test for you, son. I need you to go haggle the price from this fucking guy about a horse. And like he went over to him and he's literally like, he's honest as fuck. He's just like, my dad said I could get this horse for $25. Is that okay? And he's like, sure, 27. Like, like he's not a haggler. Like he's not there. He's just like, but then like when you see him later, he's like standing on the horse and like, doing fucking push-ups on the horse and just trotting all over the place. Like he's a whiz kid when it comes to the stuff that he cares about, which I think is just about with anybody. Like, what you're passionate about will show. And he's super fascinating as a youngin, like you said. But anything else you wanted to hit on? Maybe you could get into more of his family too.
Yeah, I mean, his just being bullied as well. I think that had a big impact on the way he saw other people and just the way he conducted himself.
Hmm.
I think you said maybe before you started the Zoom recording, maybe it was a little before that, I think, but you said the kids called him useless instead of
Yeah.
Ulysses. So I think just that type of bullying when he was a child and growing up, um, he had a different outlook on life, and it relates to the way he treats the, I guess, the enemy, in the later wars in Mexico and in the Civil War. he never um he never took advantage of the prisoners of war and whatnot,
Right.
which I think was incredibly uh, profound,
Totally. I
the way
mean,
he conducted the war.
go 100 years past then to the Japanese during World War II. There's not a good history when it comes to the way people treat prisoners, and Grant sets a precedent. I mean, he's regarded as like our first modern battle tactician when it comes to the things that he starts and like the formalities and stuff that he shows. Like, I mean, he wasn't the type to roll up into a town. I mean, we'll talk about the different marches the Union came across in different battles when we get into episode 2 with the Civil War. But specifically, Grant wasn't. He didn't look at it like when they rolled into like a Confederate kind of guarded town. He didn't look at it like, oh, um, yeah, these guys are on the wrong side. Let's burn their houses and loot them. Like he was like, these people are just ill-informed. Like we'll treat them like our kin, or treat them with respect. They're not to be just like, slaughtered. But there was specifically a lot of tomfoolery in that regard when we get more into the Civil War. But as I mentioned, Jesse Root Grant, his father, was a Whig Party supporter and fervent abolitionist, which is an interesting contrast when you think about what Grant gets into when he starts courting Julia later down the line. Um, Jesse and Hannah Simpson were married on June 24th, 1821, and their first child, Hiram Ulysses Grant, like I said, was born April 27th, 1822. The name Ulysses was drawn from ballots placed in a hat. Interesting. To honor his father-in-law, Jesse named the boy Hiram Ulysses, though he would always refer to him as Ulysses, or Ulysses in short. In 1823, the family moved to Georgetown, Ohio, where 5 siblings were born: Simpson, Clara, Orville, Jenny, and Mary. So he's one of a large uh, family, one of 6. At the age of 5, Ulysses started at a subscription school and later attended 2 private schools. In the winter of 1836 to 1837, Grant was a student at Maysville Seminary, and in the autumn of 1838, he attended John Rankin's Academy. Do you know who John Rankin is? Famous abolitionist. He
I
comes
think,
up a little in the book.
yeah, I think I might have read that. Sure.
Uh, he is essentially became known as one of Ohio's first and most active conductors on the Underground Railroad. So good dude.
Ah, yeah, that makes sense. We've talked about the Underground Railroad before. I think during the Revolutionary War,
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, the
or
early
or
seeds get planted,
or the
at
War
least,
of
or
18.
maybe it was 1812. We were
y-
talking about.
Yeah, I think it was 1812.
Um, which to put into context, obviously this is coming after 1812. And I sent it in a text to you when I was reading about it, and when we get into it, we'll dive even further. But it's in fucking insane to think about West Point in this time. It's literally like training for Civil War expendables. Like they're all there. All fucking like Robert E. Lee's there. Like they're like walking around with their gun like a pencil and a fucking trapper keeper with fucking Napoleon's notes in it. Just like, yeah, well, wonder what our next war's gonna be. You know, can't wait. We'll see what
I,
kind of tomfoolery we get into with Spain, I guess, right, boys? We'll never fight against each other. You
the
know?
the t- the time at which Grant was at West Point, um, it just lined up perfectly with them all being officers, senior officers, 20 years later, basically.
Exactly. I'm,
And he says, hold on, he says in his memoir, and I don't want to get too far ahead,
no, go ahead.
but
This shit's fascinating to me.
so he says in his memoir that he was, so he was at West Point from 1839 to 1843, and he says in his memoir, right, if you span those years and the people that were upperclassmen when he was a freshman, sophomore, and then junior, and then finally senior, and then having the three classes behind him, he knew seven classes of cadets at West Point. And
Hmm.
so you take seven classes of cadets at West Point, fast forward 20 years, they're all fucking generals and colonels and upper management written all over
I'm just
them.
picturing McClellan with a kick me sign on the back of his shirt while he's walking through class. Just like some guys getting bullied. Robert E. Lee's in the back of the class. He's like the smarmy one who's like saying like shit that's making everybody laugh. He's like, sounds like a lesson for a lesser known, a plebe. This Colonel Sanders looking motherfucker. Anyways, so that was your little bleeb about John Rankin. Wanted to mention he was a prominent Civil War abolitionist. He influenced William Lloyd Garrison, Theodore Weld, Henry Ward Beecher, and Harriet Beecher Stowe were influenced by Rankin's writings and work in the anti-slavery movement. Continuing on. In his youth, Grant developed an unusual ability to ride and manage horses. As I mentioned before, he's damn good at it. In fact, by many people who knew him, they counted him as like one of the best riders that they knew, if not the best. He just had a way of calming steeds down. I mean, he does it multiple times in the books where they're like literally they go to like a carnival and this fucking, ringleader guy is like, who can tame this horse? I'll offer him a shiny nickel. And Grant just walks up and like fucking Neo from the Matrix puts his hand out and the fucking horse just like bows to him. I mean, it's essentially he's able to calm down animals with this very calming presence. And as an animal lover myself, I have the same effect on my cat when I put kitty crispies in his bowl.
Yeah, so the his affection with horses is an interesting story. But you mentioned his childhood when he bought his first horse for $25 and became a great rider. So I mentioned earlier how he hated working in the tannery. So basically I got a shit in my throat and I can't get rid of it. So I keep clearing my throat. Sorry.
No, it's
Um
okay.
So he basically became an Uber driver with his horse when he was a kid instead of working, in the with the leather and doing the hides and everything. He would basically just like cart people from town to town with his horse. Like, can you imagine that? Like a 9-year-old kid, he's
Oh
got
yeah.
a whole freaking thing, and he's like taking. And this is, he says in his memoirs that he would travel up to 60 miles, which, I mean,
Damn.
you're talking like the you know, late 1820s, 1830s. Like, that's a long ass freaking
1830s.
way. Like 60 miles on a horse. How long does that take? A couple days one way? And then,
I mean, you
turn around.
consider you're maybe going 15 to 20 at top clip, maybe
Yeah.
well, at medium clip. But yeah, no, it's not fast. And I mean, I'm sure the local drunks appreciated it, and or the guys who needed to be somewhere quick, or females.
I wouldn't leave 60 miles from home when I was 9 years old. The only thing I was doing at 9 years old was shoveling driveways for money during the winter. I
Yeah,
wasn't getting on a horse like, you know, taking some stranger, you know,
I
from
was
here to
watching
Rochester.
I was
Like,
watching I
God,
was watching Saved by the Bell and fucking playing Super Nintendo when I was 9. Those are good days. But I wasn't fucking carting anyone anywhere, that's for sure.
people
But
were getting
yeah,
abducted when we were 9.
yeah, we got our little fucking 9-year-old boy buns sashaying around. We had to stay away from the fucking 60 miles out of town. So his father put his ability to use by giving him work driving wagon, loads of supplies, and transporting people. Unlike his siblings, Grant was not forced to attend church by his Methodist parents. For the rest of his life, though, he prayed privately and never officially joined any denomination. To others, including his own, Grant appeared to be agnostic. Grant was largely apolitical before the war. He wrote, "If I had ever had any political sympathies, they would have been with the Whigs. I was raised in that school." But that his father being a Whig Party member makes sense. And specifically, he talks about, um, I think one of the times Lincoln was on the ballot, he voted for the opposite. Um, I think it was a constant through line, the political divide between his family and his own political ideals and that of his future father-in-law. It's a constant balancing act, but
Yeah.
I
I,
get that feeling he's just common sense, um Republican for the time. But yeah, I guess Whig kind of makes sense too. I don't know, what's your take?
yeah, I think he marrying into the Dent family, I think he had to have some sort of moderate views of the Democrats of the time.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, I think he drew the line with not only the rebellion, but slavery as an issue as well. Um, Obviously, we're going to get into the Civil War and all that, but the objective at the start of the Civil War was to keep the Union together. That was the objective of Lincoln and the administration. And then later on, slavery, emancipation, all that came along. But
Well, the you know to to put it into context, and we'll kind of talk because this is all leading to the world rising into the Civil War. Um, you know, the Cliff Notes version of the Civil War is essentially that the South seceded after Lincoln was uh, put into the presidency, and effectively this was all going to butt heads with, um, big money because they wanted to build railways. They wanted things to be able to be transported, and future in the future with like highways and stuff like that. And you would run into all these laws regarding what states you were in, and slavery was one of those things where the South was like, this is about states' rights, when really it's about fucking being able to own people. Um, and being raised as an abolitionist unit and being essentially learning from John Rankin and all that, I think he could have a lot of kids when they reach puberty and even into adulthood, they generally switch from the politics they were raised on. But I think Grant really had more of a knowing what's right and what's wrong, and even knowing that it was going to cause friction in his relationship, stayed true to his own beliefs. um and like you everything that you said, I think when Civil War broke out, it felt like a personal slight, really, because it was like, okay, it's fine, you won't acknowledge the president, whatever, but like secede, like start another country. What the fuck? Like, what did we come here for? Like, I don't think, I think the ignorant believe they understand the concept of just starting another country and being like, this is me island, and right here is what I do. Here it is. The law is this. Like, it is so stupid, especially when like the idea is for us to grow together and to grow the essentially the American dream. It's not about like giving more money to the country or anything. It's about the unity of this new world that we're starting together. Like, the country was still so new. We had the fucking receipt still taped to our asses. Like, the England had just basically been like, okay, fine, you're fucking America. Boo. Like, for us to suddenly just get into a civil war with such a fucking quagmire. But people are proud creatures. And when it comes to like things that we fight about, and throw in a good set of fucking PTSD from the Revolutionary War in 1812 and a whole host of fucking nonsense like slavery at the time, and you got yourself a civil war, brother. But let's get into the West Point a bit here. So Jesse Grant wrote to Representative Thomas L. Hamer requesting that he nominate Ulysses to the United States Military Academy at West Point, New York, which Hamer did in spring of 1839. I want to mention, I didn't hear anything about him having any girlfriends back home, like in school or anything like that. Like I mentioned, he was a BC student. Um, but this is a big turning point, I think, for Grant going to West Point. Um, and I to Jesse Grant's credit, I feel like he wants the best for his son. He just gets way too ahead of himself sometimes. Like, this is a good move, and I have nothing against um, you know, this scenario, especially at the time there was no, I mean, there were in time there's always been nepo babies and shit like that, but like, to go to West Point again, like the military wasn't necessarily considered like the pinnacle as it maybe could have been at certain times in history. But um I'm familiar with Grant. Hamer altered his name, so Grant was enlisted under the name U.S. Grant. As the initials US also stood for Uncle Sam, he became known amongst Army colleagues as Sam.
Interesting tidbit.
In the service, most of the time they call you by your last name. Um, I guess if you incur some sort of nickname like G Child or
Yeah, that was
Raids.
my that was my stage name in the military. G Chow.
Now coming to the muster.
Uh, I never. I think. I think Dane probably was the first person to call me Adam in the Navy.
Hmm.
Uh, Nobody called me Adam ever. Like, uh, like it was weird to call people by their first names, and that's something civilians might not like really get. But like, it was really weird to call you Ryan for the first time, or like Dodge Jesse,
Hmm.
or whoever we hung out with. But I think Dane was the first one to start calling me Adam. I'm like, motherfucker,
The
I'm
second you
MA2 Bacchus.
the second you just said that Dane was the first person to say your name, I heard his voice in my head. I definitely heard him yell at him many times.
Yeah,
Anyway,
but
so yep,
yeah, U.S. Grant,
Sam.
Uncle
Ini-
Sam Grant.
Initially, Grant was indifferent to military life, but within a year, he re-examined his desire to leave the academy and later wrote that, on the whole, I like this place very much. Um, I mean, New York's a pretty state. How far away are you from West Point?
A couple hours. West Point's downstate.
Okay. Have you ever been there?
No, I've probably driven past it on the thruway or something. But yeah, it's like I don't know, 3 hours, maybe 3.5 hour drive. So it's I've never been there, but I've seen pictures of it, obviously, and it's pretty gorgeous. I mean, the whole Catskills area is really pretty and scenic. New York's a big ass state. I mean, we have the Adirondacks up north, and the Catskill Mountains, downstate, and then everything in between.
And you got
So
the big old city.
yeah, that's a different world compared to what we're used to. There's If you're a New Yorker, there's two New Yorks. I don't even like to say upstate because I'm not upstate. I'm central New York. There's 10 regions in New York State, and New York City is like its own thing. Like it's not even like that. I mean, you've been here. I
Hmm.
live on backcountry roads. I got nothing but view. It's not crowded. It's country.
Couple of banjo players in a Piggly Wiggly.
No,
Um,
no Piggly Wigglies in New York.
no, I know. Um, so he earned a reputation as the most proficient horseman while at the academy. Seeking relief from military routine, he studied under Romantic artist Robert Walter Weir, producing 9 surviving artworks. Walter Weir is an American artist and educator and is considered a painter of the Hudson River School. Weir was elected to the National Academy of Design in 1829 and was an instructor at the U.S. Military Academy. His best known work is Embarkation of the Pilgrims in the U.S. Capitol Rotunda in Washington, D.C. A little bit about Robert Weir. Um, Grant spent more time reading books from the library than his academic texts. He was a big, voracious reader as well. Which I mean, at the time, like he grew up playing marbles and you know, he loved to swim. We didn't mention that. He loved to swim and ride horses. Um, but I think specifically during this period of his time is when he really kicked into high gear with reading. Um, which you should do. Read books, folks. It's important.
Wasn't a
Uh,
whole lot to do back then.
oh man, you didn't have Netflix. You didn't have fucking everybody's pussy smells like fucking worn fucking tannery. I mean that for
Yeah,
dicks too, man.
it. Not to go off on like a personal tangent, but like I don't read nearly as much as I used to. It's I mean I read all day long. I read the news. I read my computer, and I do read books. But it, and when I say my computer, I meant like my work. I look at shit all day long, documents that I have to read through and whatnot. Um, but yeah, it's just reading. I hate to say it, but I feel like everybody's got their phone in their face and their iPads, and they're on social media. And I feel like reading is, didn't like, what was that big bookstore that went bankrupt, and
Oh, Borders.
Borders. Yeah, like
Mhm.
people aren't going to buy books anymore.
Well, there's still Barnes and Noble in my area, which I still go to, but I would more so than not say to go to your local library. Um, Especially for people who don't want to spend a lot of money. There's so much to read out there that I think specifically historically or just biographies. I've read some great books in the last year about old Hollywood that are really fascinating, which are future episodes. Like I love the whole creation of Hollywood just because of it's just a place that should not fucking exist. It's like a desert that somehow they fucking truck water out to and it becomes where they suddenly make Iron Man. Um
Daniela reads a lot. She's burning through a book every like 2 weeks, and Danielle goes to the library, the local library, all the time, and checks out books. It's
yeah, I
interesting.
mean the one by me, you can check out board games and video games and comic books. I mean everything like check out your local library, folks. I said it from the beginning of the podcast. I'll say it now. So, quiet by nature. Uh, as I mentioned, he's kind of reserved. He's not an extrovert. Definitely an introvert when it comes to social gatherings. He's more prone to stand in the back and kind of like monitor. On Sundays, cadets were required to march to and attend services at the Academy's church, which Grant disliked. He established a few intimate friends among fellow cadets, including Frederick Tracy Dent and James Longstreet. Ooh, Frederick Tracy Dent, American general. Uh, Frederick Tracy Dent lived to the age of 71, which is like 2000 in our time, in that day. James Longstreet.
2000, 2000. Yeah. In a span of in a span of 150 years, the average lifespan has gone from 71 to 2000.
Hey man, Elon's making those microchips. You're gonna fucking put them in our brain, download Windows 10 and fucking fly to the moon. Um, James Longstreet, also interesting, was a Confederate general in the Civil War. So keep your enemies close and your friends closer. I don't know.
I think
I
he had it
fucked that up.
backwards.
Yeah,
Yeah, he had it backwards. That's all right.
it's all right. I assume He-Man and Skeletor hang out on their off days. It's totally cool. I just like to think of like us going to high school with the Taliban or some shit.
Yeah.
Like,
Um,
Mustar, can I look at your fucking answers for the test? Oh, fuck you, Herrig. Your treat. I'm sorry, that might be bad. All right, anyway, so he was inspired both by the commandant Captain Charles Ferguson Smith and by General Winfield Scott, who visited the academy to review the cadets. Grant later wrote of the military life, there is much to dislike, but more to like. So he was a glass half full type gentleman. Again, his mom considered a saint, nice to animals, abolitionist views, uh, introverted, West Point, glass half full, hanging out with the enemy, doesn't know it at the time, just being chums, playing kickball, reading fucking um, what would be popular fiction of the time? Uh, Something probably like Homer and like old Greek history. I don't know. I don't know what books were on the fucking Oprah's book club during the time, but Grant graduated on June 30th,
Mark
1843.
Mark
Ranked.
Twain was around.
Oh, that's true. And we'll get to Samuel Clemens actually, and probably more in like episode 3. But Grant graduated on June 30th, 1843, ranked 21st out of 39 in his class. Was promoted the next day to brevet second lieutenant.
That guy didn't want to be it. He didn't care about being there.
Well,
Do
yeah,
you
he
have it?
planned to resign.
Yeah.
He didn't care about his commission.
Um, I don't want to steal your thunder. I don't know what you got written down, but
No, 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 no. Go
um,
ahead.
but like yeah, like the demerit situation that he experienced while he was at West Point was funny because like um, you remember, anyone who's been in the military knows that uniform inspections are a very important thing and a very routine thing. And like Grant didn't give two shits about his uniform
Me
at all.
either. So this part of the book, I was right there with him.
Yeah, right.
I kept
So,
hearing you like, would you fucking iron that with a rock? Or like Dane saying that, or like our Master Chief doing an inspection and just looking at me and fucking giggling under his breath. Cause he
or,
knew. And those guys
uh,
are smart enough to know that like some guys don't care, but they get the job done. Like I knew that then, and Grant knew that then. Everybody, it doesn't matter in a foxhole what your fucking if your pin's on correctly, like none of that shit to me it the big deal is to show up on time, which I never am, but like I tried to be. Like I especially in my 40s now, I make a conscious effort to try to follow through on everything I set my mind to. And Grant understood what was good and what bad. So go ahead, sorry.
yeah, no, I mean, when you're in, like, I guess I never went to OCS. You haven't gone to OCS or anything like that, but West Point boot camp, they all try to, you know, you're you do these menial tasks, which all serve a purpose, is to train your mind. But basically, you when you're doing it, you're like, what the hell am I doing this for? Like, how much time did we spend trying to learn how to fold 45-degree angles on our bed sheets in boot camp, and shining our boots until you could see a reflection in them, like stuff
Mm-hmm.
like that. The
Well, I understand the thought process though. It's the idea is to shoot for the moon, but like hope for the minimum. Uh like full disclosure, I live alone, but I make my bed every day. Um and when it came to how I dressed when I got out of boot camp, I had more control and I was more noticed, especially from my family members, and the woman I was dating at the time was like, "Damn, you look sharp." And I was like, "What?" But part of that is mentally getting your mindset in the to get yourself prepared. It's essentially why some people think like our youths, like when they graduate, should have military service time because it prepares you to be an adult. In a lot of ways, people need that. Like some people we met when we were in the service were guys who were told by a judge, like, hey, you can either do time or community service or you can join the service. And they were like, fuck it, I'll join the Navy. And that was a good move. I
yeah.
don't know. Is that a bad tangent? What are you going to say about uniforms? Did you say it all? Adam was always sharp dressed, by the way.
uh no, I wasn't. My uniform was always on point. I always like to make sure my shit was shit hot.
Yeah, I didn't give two shits. I was more concerned with in the service, I was more concerned about like
Making music.
making music. I I hate to say it. I wasn't necessarily the like if I had maybe put my mind to it and had wanted to make a career of it, I get it. But Grant specifically was similar in this time. I don't think he was thinking long term about like a career in the service. I think he was hoping to, essentially go back home and work with his dad in some capacity, not in the tannery, but doing something similar, like maybe business wise or whatever.
Well, he he basically wanted to be. He found his love in math when he was at West Point. So um, you might hit on this, but basically he wanted to get an apprenticeship under his math professor at West Point. He wanted to be a math teacher in some aspect.
which is so far from what I would ever want to do in my life. Like I remember reading that and thinking of my dad more than myself because my dad is like huge math guy. And I mean, he's been made a successful career out of it being an engineer. Um, so like I said, he graduated 21st out of 39. He planned to resign his commission after his 4-year term. He would later write that among the happiest days of his life were the day he left the presidency and the day he left the academy. Which I get. The day I left boot camp, I was like, thank fucking God. Immediately I can go to McDonald's and get a 20 piece.
Yeah, man, but you got to think that this is only 8 weeks for us.
Oh, totally. No,
West
I'm
Point,
just
4 years.
no, I agree. I agree.
That's a long time.
Yeah,
But
4 years
that
is
and that
long.
time, you got to think like that's your first enlistment. Most of us join for 4 or 5 years, and you spend 4 years, and it's not like active duty. It's West Point. I mean, for all I know, it could be even more arduous and difficult to get through on a daily basis. But he describes in his memoirs that like it was the slowest time ever. Like it dragged on. 4 years seemed to, you know, 10, 20 years for him. He describes it very vividly in his memoirs how he just, time dragged and dragged and dragged until he
Oh, and
finally.
I remember time feeling that way. Uh Now it feels like I can't stop the days. They just keep flying by. But like in the service for sure. Yeah. Like the power of boredom will drive you to drink and fucking go crazy. And I get it. Like 110%. And if you're listening to this and you're in the service now, thank you for your service. This is coming out on Memorial Day. So thank you to those who gave all. And in memory of them, um, hopefully we don't do a disservice to anyone with this episode, but I think most people from the Civil War are long gone. But happy Memorial Day. So despite his excellent horsemanship, he was not assigned to the cavalry, but to the 4th Infantry Regiment. Grant's first assignment was the Jefferson Barracks near St. Louis, Missouri, commanded by Colonel Stephen Kearny. This was the nation's largest military base in the West. Grant was happy with his new commander, but looked forward to the end of his military service and a possible teaching career, as Adam alluded to. As Adam alluded to, yes, he was priming himself for a job as a math teacher. Um, but in all this time, what of love? Where was the love? There was times where he would go off, and you mentioned like demerits and all that stuff and getting in trouble in school and all that. He would get in trouble for being late because he literally would go hang out with these local Bettys, and they were showing him attention and he was just like loving it, you know. But he was so like kind of tuned out from the service and missing home and the general pleasantries of civilian life. Um, and this would end up following him around in his life later on, specifically um the when it came to who was in charge with Kearney. But I'll get into that in episode 2 a little bit more. Just wanted to put a little asterisk by that. So here comes the love, folks. In 1844, Grant accompanied Frederick Dent to Missouri and met his family, including Dent's sister, Julia. And this is where Total Eclipse of the Heart plays. As Grant gets off his horse with his IPA looking beard. And I think this was Grant specifically felt as though this was love at first sight. They were like, she had she had a bit of a Tom York eye, but like not like she wasn't ugly, but she was definitely like plain-ish. Like her own mom, by admission, wasn't didn't even call her like, "There's my beautiful girl." She's like, "There's my homely girl who's so good." Like literally in description, it's like, Jesus, mom, can we get a rewrite? But like Julia is a very like there were things you can tell that like she wanted a soldier and he wanted someone like his mom, but also someone who had her own senses and like knowledge and wit. And they were like immediately inseparable. Like he needed that partnership, somebody. And in Julia, he found somebody who was like not only like a lovely person, but like completely loyal and to the end. Like she would switch her ideals from her father's to completely being for the union. She and and like I said, he was smitten with her. Like when her bird died, he had the little mock canary funeral, and he was just enamored. They would go on these walks and like literally just laugh from their souls. I don't want to talk about love because I don't believe in that shit anymore. Sorry. But it's true. Like they were fully in love with each other. And on August 22nd, they 1848, they were married at Julia's home in St. Louis. Now, we'll mention Mr. Dent was not excited about Grant at all. Like he didn't think a soldier was good enough for Julia. And he was also pro-slavery, which is bad on him. But this just comes to show that even with the friction and Grant not being so enticed by having to deal with drama, like most of us should be, some people are fucking jokers out there and like to deal with that, but I don't. And Grant didn't either. Um, that obviously he was very much in love with her. I want to mention too, Grant didn't like he wasn't so much of an introvert that he would back down. Like he literally knocked a dude out who was bullying him at West Point. Like one punch man just fucking saddled his ass on the ground. And I want to mention too, when he came into West Point, he was 5'2", and when he left, he was 5'8", and like had put on a bunch of fucking muscle. So he was not to be trifled with. Future Union fucking top elbow from the top rope. Bam. Kick your ass, bitch. Anyway, so he gets married to Julia. And as I mentioned, Grant's abolitionist father disapproved of the Dents owning slaves, and neither of Grant's parents attended the wedding. Family drama, folks. Future 18th president of the United States leads the Union to victory. In episode 2, you'll see. And this dude, you can't get away from it. Everybody's got it. Bullshit left and right in this world. You can't get away. Pisses me
Yeah,
off, man. When I read that
his
part, I was gritting my teeth in the book. I was just like, fuck.
yeah, his wedding attendance was kind of sad for him. That nobody from his family came and his parents weren't there. And the book mentions that Longstreet was his best man, which I did a little bit more digging on that because I was curious about it, and it is kind of disputed. But the the book that you did at the beginning um, says that Longstreet, who ended up being a Confederate general, was his best man at his wedding, which is fucking insane. That's insane.
It is. Folks, I can't think of a more crazy situation. I mean, that would be like fucking Barack Obama getting married to Michelle Obama and his best man is bin Laden.
Yeah, I'm sure there's people out there that actually believe that. Don't say that because that could become an internet rumor.
All right.
Did you hear what that guy said on that podcast that Bin Laden was Obama's best man? What? Yeah, the guy said it on the podcast.
Yeah, I heard it on Q message boards, man. Anyway, fuck that noise. But
Dude,
anyway,
check your
yeah,
phone. I sent you a truth.
where we go one, we go all, brother. Come on, guys. Come on, guys. Lay off the edibles. Touch grass. So we're going to get into the children of the Grants. The couple had 4 children: Frederick, Ulysses Jr. or Buck, Ellen or Nellie, and Jesse the second. After the wedding, Grant obtained a 2-month extension to his leave and returned to St. Louis, where he decided that with a wife to support, he would remain in the Army. All right, so we got one more big portion and then we're going to call it on this episode. But I want to, up to this point, ask you, do you have anything you want to add to his marriage or before we get into the Mexican American War?
No, I got nothing to add to that.
Okay.
I do have to go to the bathroom. So can we take a quick 30
Yeah,
second
let's take
pause
a quick PB.
before we get into the Mexican American War?
And after a Mexican American War, we'll call that for part 1.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
Danielle needed to get some
No, you're good.
water.
All right, boy. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we're going to get into the Mexican American War. Grant's unit was stationed in Louisiana as part of the Army of Occupation under Major Generally Zachary Taylor. And a little bit about Zachary Taylor. This was somebody who Grant really, really, really looked up to. And in the book specifically, he's mentioned as he had this nature of where he liked to ride a donkey or a mule rather than a horse, like a big horse. And he liked to eat apples with his shoes off. And he liked to kind of just, he was just this low key, like he had a mannerism that Grant admired. Uh, and something about him inspired him. Uh, in
Yeah,
September, what's that?
he makes some comparisons with Taylor and Winfield Scott in the book. And I don't want to get into it now, but just like their demeanor, and Taylor was like you said, he's just much more chill than Winfield Scott was.
Yeah.
I don't think Taylor appreciated his uniform as much as Scott, and so he was on the same level as Grant in that manner. They were just like, not not giving a shit, more laid back, chill.
You've got your Harrigs in your unit, and then you've got your Gallardos.
It was fucking Gallardo, really? Holy shit, I haven't heard that name in a while.
I was waiting to say that just to see your face. That's just for me and him. Anyway, that name.
Gallardo said something to me in Iceland, which has stuck with me 20 years now later, and I'll never forget. He was talking something about somebody, and he goes to me, and I don't want to fuck up his accent, but he was a Southern fella, and he was talking about this guy, and Gallardo says to me, I don't know, we were on post or something. He goes, he's more stupider than a rattlesnake in the sun. And I fucking have remembered that for the last 20 years. It's the funniest shit I've ever heard. Anyway.
You meet them all different characters in the service, folks.
Shout out to Gallardo if you're out there.
Yeah, shout out, brother. In September 1846, President James K. Polk ordered Taylor to march 150 miles south to the Rio Grande, marching to Fort Texas to prevent a Mexican siege. Grant experienced combat for the first time on May 8th, 1846, at the Battle of Palo Alto. Grant served as regimental quartermaster, and that's where he really starts to find his footing in the service. But yearned for a combat role. When finally allowed, he led a charge at the Battle of Risasa de la Palma. He demonstrated his equestrian ability at the Battle of Monterey by volunteering to carry a dispatch past snipers, where he hung off the side of his horse, keeping the animal between him and the enemy. Polk, wary of Taylor's growing popularity, divided his forces, sending some troops, including Grant's unit, to form a new army under Major General Winifred Scott. And you alluded to Winifred Scott. What is your take on Scott?
I think the politics of the Mexican-American War were really interesting to me. Um, the the political ambitions of Scott and Taylor were completely different at the time, and
Mhm.
Polk knew that, and so what the hell is that? Is there music playing in the background? I just heard it.
Oh
Um,
yeah, I'm playing Civil War music. Right.
oh, I just heard it through my headphones. But yeah, the politics of the war were interesting to me, um, because Taylor was a Whig and so was Scott. And when Taylor started to become popular, Polk was like, "Yeah, he's a potential presidential candidate now that he's getting positive press and all these things with some of the victories that they had in the in the war." And so when he sent Scott down there to basically take over everything, um, it all sort of backfired on Polk. And obviously Taylor ended up getting the nomination to become the president. But it was a really interesting read, because I think Grant says in his memoirs, like, there's nothing there's nothing that will, at that time, that you'll get more popularity from than some good wins during war, something
Mhm.
like that. I'm paraphrasing, I probably butchered that, but basically, that was their political clout, winning battles in the war.
And
And
this is a
so,
time where newspaper was just like that's how people got word around, and any positive press was like a wildfire. It just spread. Um,
yeah,
and as you alluded to, I mean, Polk was not. This is all Civil War Game of Thrones or pre-Civil War Game of Thrones, and the Game of
totally.
Thrones is always being played, and you'll see it even more during the Civil War and after. So, traveling by sea, Scott's army landed at Veracruz and advanced toward Mexico City. The army met the Mexican forces at the Battle of Molino del Rey and Chapultepec. For his bravery at Molino del Rey, Grant was uh, breveted first lieutenant on September 30th at San Cosme. Grant directed his men to drag a disassembled howitzer into a church steeple, then reassembled it and bombarded nearby Mexican troops. Um, his bravery and initiative earned him his brevet promotion to captain. So, like, one of the things that I get from Grant is that he's very reactionary. He's one of the best generals that I've read about when it comes to reacting on the battlefield, which was also a very Napoleonic thing to do. Um, Tacticians always want to like, or history like buffs who love the details, the nitty gritty about war. Um, Always like to study like how they plan, but like things like this you can't really study because it's all, I mean, you can see the reactions, but like essentially you have to know how to maneuver on a battlefield and how to respond in turn. And I think that was one of Grant's strengths, was knowing what and how to move and rally his forces. um like you said, I mean, he's already up to captain at this point. He's just fucking, he's competent. And
Yeah.
the people, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, so yeah, he learned a ton about warfare during the Mexican American War, and you just touched on it. Basically how he was responsible for like all the supply. Being the quartermaster. He was in charge of making sure that the troops were fed. They had tents. They had whatever they needed. Um, and it plays a lot into the Civil War as far as like what he learned to take care of first and foremost. Um,
These guys need aspirin. These guys need fucking picture frames to put next to their fucking cots. These guys need boots. These guys need tobacco. Um, Stay away from the fucking devil's liquid.
but it's worth noting though that he didn't, even though he learned a lot from his position as quartermaster, he really didn't. He wasn't content in that position because it kept him away from a lot of the action.
Right. Yeah, and he wasn't a fan of brutality in any way. Like he wasn't like one of these guys who was charging in with like a bloodlust. I think he essentially just wanted to like knock out the bully like he did in West Point. Um so as I said, he became captain on September 14th, 1847. Scott's army marched into the city of Mexico, ceded the vast territory, including California, to the U.S. on February 2nd, 1848. During the war, Grant established a commendable record as a daring and competent soldier, studied the tactics and strategies of Scott and Taylor, and emerged as a seasoned officer, writing in his memoirs that this is how he learned about military leadership. Um, in retrospect, although he respected Scott, he identified his leadership style with Taylor's. Grant later believed the Mexican War was morally unjust and that the territorial gains were designed to expand slavery. He his in his opinion, Civil War was divine punishment for U.S. aggression against Mexico. During the war, Grant discovered his moral courage and began to consider a career in the army. Historians have pointed to the importance of Grant's experience as an assistant quartermaster during the war. Although he was initially averse to the position, it prepared Grant in understanding military supply routes, transportation systems, and logistics, particularly with regard to provisioning a large mobile army operating in hostile territory. According to biographer Ronald White, Grant came to recognize how wars could be won by or lost by crucial factors beyond the tactical battlefield. Show up prepared, show up on time. That's 80% of it, folks.
Yeah, and this is the whole thing about gaining that knowledge and knowing I think they referred to it as the nuts and bolts. Being able to supply your army, when you're away from supply lines. And
Mhm.
he he the the shit that he learned during his experience in Mexico really shaped. I don't think. Well, obviously, he wouldn't have been a general during the Civil War had he not,
Climbed
been,
up the ranks
West.
in this.
Yeah, and climbed up the ranks in the Mexican American War, but learning all the things about maintaining the army and moving the army was crucial. But a bigger crucial aspect of his time in the Mexican American War was the fact that all the guys that were, calling the shots then, he would later face in the Civil War. So he knew their psychology and he knew, how they reacted to certain situations, which played in his favor heavily during the Civil War because he could almost predict, you know,
Knew where they were sitting, so he knew where to put the whoopee cushions.
yeah, like it's really interesting to me that him and Robert E. Lee, served right along each other,
Hmm.
uh, towards the end of the war in Veracruz and Chapultepec and Mexico City. Um, so he knew, how Robert E. Lee, how he commanded, and so obviously plays a huge role later on down the road. But
He essentially got to sit next to him while they played GoldenEye, so he was looking at his screen the whole time. He's like, "Bitch, I know where you're in. You're in the fucking bathroom. I'm gonna throw proximity mines everywhere."
Yeah, essentially, is just fucking
I'm
looking at
just
his
trying to
screen.
get the trying to get the just trying to get the dads to understand. But anyway, no, those are all fucking valid points, and you should follow our YouTube. If you're not watching this already on YouTube, this video will be up. You can see clips, and that might make a clip. So post-war assignments, and then we'll wrap this baby up. Grant's first post-war assignment took him and Julia to Detroit, Michigan. What's up, Detroit Rock City? On November 17th, 1848, but he was soon transferred to Madison Barracks, a desolate outpost in upstate New York. Damn it.
Was he Saratoga?
Where's Madison Barracks? Let me look this up real quick. Sackett's Harbor.
Or yeah, not Saratoga. I was thinking S. Yeah, Sackett's Harbor. So
Jefferson
Saratoga's on the other
County.
side. Yeah, Saratoga's on the other side of the upstate
Oh,
Adirondack area. Sackett's Harbor's yeah, it's like on Lake Ontario, St. Lawrence Seaway area. Really pretty up there.
cool, man.
But yeah, cold as shit. Way cold.
Mm-hmm.
Like Minnesota cold.
Yeah.
UP cold.
Fuck that
So
noise. We Southwest Michiganders, we don't need it. We got fucking places to be, mail to deliver. So, um, in bad need of supplies and repair, by the way, this outpost. After 4 months, Grant was sent back to his quartermaster job in Detroit when the discovery of gold in California brought droves of prospectors and settlers to the territory. Grant and the 4th Infantry were ordered to reinforce the small garrison there. Grant was charged with bringing soldiers and a few hundred civilians from New York City to Panama, overland to the Pacific, and then north to California. Julia, 8 months pregnant with Ulysses Jr., did not accompany him. And this was a big thing. He often wrote to Julia and was often constantly missing home, missing his family. And home was Julia. It didn't matter, if he was back in Ohio or whatever, where his dad was, which his dad was always following the press pretty closely. Like when he saw his son pop up, he was like, "Oh shit, that's my boy." Um, and essentially he was drinking on and off during this whole period. He would get into temperance and then he would relapse, and he was the kind of drinker where he specifically would imbue privately, like, and then people would see him later and be like, "Hey, Grant," and he'd just be fucking staring off 1,000-yard stare, listening to somebody play folk music off in the distance, just kind of like wistfully daydreaming about being back home. um and some people have faulted him for, like, say, imbibing on at times, and there being a concern about his leadership role. And I this is where, in this part of the book, where I really felt for him, because it was such a it there's nothing worse than when you're homesick, you're missing your girl, and you're doing shit like this where it's just like your sense of purpose is off, you know? And if you don't have like anything to do, you'll kind of just do donuts in your personal life. And um yeah, I feel bad for Grant, uh because it is a struggle. Um But specifically, this at this time, Grant was charged with bringing soldiers and a few hundred civilians from New York City to Panama, overland to the Pacific, and then north to California. And Julia has this baby cooking, and essentially in her belly, and he's not going to see this kid. Like, he doesn't even know the sex of the baby, because also keep in mind the post is not delivered quickly. Like, mail does not come fast, and there was some there was some people that were like, we think maybe Julia, like, she gets a headache or something with her weird lazy eye, and it's hard for her to write. So like, um, he wasn't getting letters, and sometimes like Napoleon was with with his lady of love. Um, he was worried that she was cheating, or that his father like was essentially who had wanted her to marry some like Confederate leaning fella, um, was being discerned about being married to Grant. And that sucks. Like when you're out there and you got nothing to go on, no text messages, nothing, no FaceTimes with your old Navy buddies or Army buddies, no catching up. Like, of course he's gonna, if unless you're literally the like Jesus on earth, like how are you gonna keep your mind straight? It's no wonder he would fall into the drink occasionally. Um, while Grant was in Panama, a cholera epidemic killed many soldiers and civilians. Grant organized a field hospital in Panama City and moved the worst cases to a hospital barge 1 mile offshore. When orderlies protested having to attend to the sick, Grant did much of the nursing himself, earning high praise from observers. In August, Grant arrived in San Francisco. His next assignment sent him north to Vancouver Barracks in the Oregon Territory. And he was blown away by San Francisco at the time. Um,
Yeah. Can we just talk for a second about how incredibly treacherous it was to go from New York to California? At the time, he didn't go across land. He sailed down to Panama, and then they crossed the isthmus, and then he sailed up through the Pacific Ocean on the west coast into California. A trip
yeah,
that
it's
it's
fucking nuts.
like a 35-day trek to get from New York to California. And you mentioned the cholera outbreak. Like, everybody was sick as shit
Yeah,
on these rocky ass boats. They were all congested as hell. Um, they were overpacked with all these soldiers and their families and other people catching rides. And he talks about in his memoirs, but the book uh, that you cited
mm-hmm.
as well, the one that
Ron
Chernow book,
Chernow, Grant.
yeah, um, like, instead of drinking the water on his cruise down the coast, and the cruise up the coast, and the trek across the isthmus, he would drink booze to avoid drinking the cholera infected water. And, like, everybody was dying. you
Right.
know I think it mentioned that like a seventh of the um, fourth infantry that he was going over with, seventh died on the trip.
Yeah.
Like, that's
No
crazy.
joke. Travel was dangerous. And like you mentioned, yeah, like alcohol was usually the remedy. And more often than not, it's like you stub your toe, here's a beer. You fucking your stomach hurts, here's some whiskey. You're about to get your Civil War leg cut off, here's fucking spirits. Take it. Like alcohol was common to be prescribed for ailments. And yeah, that was not a fun boat ride. Like he talks about it, like you said in his memoirs, but in the book too, they discuss about how seasick people were constantly and how shitty the travel was.
Yeah, I think
Um,
it's interesting too to mention, while we're on the subject, is that when he crossed over Panama, uh,
mhm.
his idea then came to fruition, obviously during the Roosevelt administration, but the Panama Canal, because it was all over land then, and they were in horse and wagon, and just like going through just shit. I guess it's like a 35-mile stretch or something, but
Mhm. Well, no,
yeah,
and but yeah, it just it comes to show that like maybe not in your time, but in the future, like great things can be accomplished. And there's a guy named Teddy. See those episodes. That was a fun series. So Grant tried several business ventures, but failed. And in one instance, his business partner absconded with $800 of Grant's investment, equivalent to 23,000 in 2023. I
That was a
feel
lot of
so
money.
bad for him, man, because like he's just too honest to do business. Like, and business guys back then are like, I got something that'll make you taller.
Dude, his side quests uh, while he was out in California and Oregon, they're so fucking funny, dude. I'm sure you sure you heard some of them, read some of them, but like the he tried to grow the potato. Like everything he tried to do fucking sucked, and he failed at it, or he
Mhm.
got robbed at some point, scammed out of his money. He would not be. Uh, he would not survive nowadays with the amount of phone scams that go on. He'd be clicking links. His computer's gonna have
He's
viruses.
like your he's like your parents with the Wi-Fi or some shit. Like,
You'll
yeah.
send me $50,000 if I send you a $200 Walmart gift card. You
Have
got it, buddy.
have you heard of this South African prince?
Dude,
Guys,
I think the funniest one, the chicken story was funny. He tried to, his potatoes. First of all, his potato venture uh, shot because the field got flooded and the market got flooded, and so potatoes. Dude, the potatoes were like I shit, and I'm gonna screw up the number, but it was like a couple dollars a bushel or a couple dollars a pound, something like that. But anyway, uh, potatoes didn't work out. He tried to be a chicken farmer, and like half his chickens died when they were shipped to San Francisco. So he lost a bunch of money raising chickens, and then half of them dying. But the funniest side quest he went on was uh, when he tried to be an ice salesman. So ice was a very uh, rare thing then, and he again during shipment he had all these thousands of pounds of ice blocks or something. I don't know how the hell um, he got them, but basically the ice melted during shipment, and he lost all his money as an ice salesman. I think that was the that was the funniest one. Uh, poor Grant.
yeah, this all endears me more to him though. This whole period, the on again, off again, alcoholism, the will he be an army guy or won't he resign and be a math teacher, the being in love with the girl whose daddy is a fucking Confederate leaning douche, like it all endears me more to him. And then this time, um, and being a nurse, helping people, like being there for people during these disease outbreaks. Concerning local Indians, Grant assured Julia by letter they were harmless after he witnessed white agents cheating Indians of their supplies and their devastation by smallpox and measles transferred to them by white settlers. He developed empathy for their plight. Promoted to captain on August 5th, 1853, Grant was assigned to command Company F, 4th Infantry at the newly constructed Fort Humboldt in California. Grant arrived at Fort Humboldt on January 5th, 1854, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Robert C. Buchanan. Separated from his family, Grant decided to drink. Colonel Buchanan reprimanded Grant for one drinking episode and told Grant to resign or reform. Grant told Buchanan he would resign if I don't reform. On Sunday, Grant was found influenced by alcohol but not incapacitated at his company's pay table. Keeping his pledge to Buchanan, Grant resigned effective July 31st, 1854. Buchanan endorsed Grant's letter of resignation but did not submit any report that verified the incident. Grant did not face court martial, and the War Department said nothing stands against his good name. Grant said years later, the vice of intemperance, drunkenness, had not a little to do with my decision to resign. With no means of support, Grant returned to St. Louis and reunited with his family.
Yeah, he completely skips over this in his memoirs. He doesn't say anything about being the drunk in the in the you know in the fucking platoon or whatever the hell he was in. He doesn't mention anything about being the drunk guy and that
As
being
a
the cause.
captain.
Yeah, that he attributes mainly his resignation to missing uh,
Julia.
Julia and
Yep.
his now two children. Um,
The second he's which is, I mean, at this point he's been in for a while. He's when he gets back, he's 32. So like he's uh entering civilian life well out of his 20s. He's seen the world, he's been around, he's experienced warfare. You know, whether or not he's imbibing or drunk is, I think, besides the point. Like he just misses his wife.
yeah,
And this
and
guy
he's bored.
out for
And
Grant too. He's poor as well, right?
yeah, bored.
Or I'm sorry, bored.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, he's just bored as shit. Um,
And guys are over there fucking, you know, sleight of hand fucking snake oil salesmen. They're taking his goddamn money. His ice business failed. His fucking chickens are dead. It's time to go back home.
I mean, he had a lot of shit to be depressed about. The depression and the boredom, and the fact that that alcohol consumption apparently was ubiquitous amongst the officers.
Yeah.
I read that every day after drill they would go and uh, play poker and drink whiskey, and
Well,
then
they're kept
afterward,
there. It didn't help that their PT, their camelbacks were filled with Gentleman Jack.
yeah. So I mean, it was like, you wake up, you go drill, you come back. It reminds me of those Iceland mornings where the
Yeah.
just like we'd get off, we work 12-hour shift, we get off, it's like 7 o'clock in the morning. Sun's coming up or has been up all night, depending on what time of the year it was. We would just go get smashed at 7 a.m., outside Dane's barracks. Uh,
Smoking. Oh, geez. So Grant entered civilian life in 1854 at 32 without any money-making vocation to support his growing family. It was the beginning of 7 years of financial struggles, poverty, and instability. Grant's father offered him a place in the Galena, Illinois branch of the family's leather business, but demanded Julia and the children stay in Missouri with the Dents or with the Grants in Kentucky. Grant and Julia declined. For the next 4 years, Grant farmed with the help of Julia's slave, Dan, on his brother in law's property, Wishton Wish, near St. Louis. The farm was not successful, and to earn an alternative living, he sold firewood on St. Louis street corners. In 1856, the Grants moved to land on Julia's father's farm and built a home called Hardscrabble on Grant's farm. Julia described the rustic house as an unattractive cabin, but made the dwelling as homelike as possible. Grant's family had little money, clothes, and furniture, but always had enough food. During the Panic of 1857, which devastated Grant as it did many farmers, Grant pawned his gold watch to buy Christmas gifts. In 1858, Grant rented out Hardscrabble and moved his family to Julia's father's 850-acre plantation. That fall, after having malaria, Grant gave up farming. This guy just can't win.
Sold all his shit.
The same year, Grant acquired a slave from his father in law, a 35-year-old man named William Jones. Although Grant was not an abolitionist at the time, he disliked slavery and could not bring himself to force an enslaved man to work. In March 1859, Grant freed William by a manumission deed, which a manumission is the act of freeing slave by their owners, enfranchisement. Potentially worth at least $1,000, equivalent to 34,000 in 2023.
Yeah, and that's an important point to emphasize is that at this time where he was dirt poor, trying to sell firewood, living on his father-in-law's property, just kind of trying to make ends meet, financially, and he had a slave given to him, and rather than sell him for money, which I read was, upwards of $1,000 at the time, which is a lot of money. Like I think you made
Mhm.
the uh, earlier talking about him getting swindled out of 800 was like 23 or 25 grand in today's money. So it's a lot of money to part with. You know, in in that time of thinking, not today thinking that like human is worth money, a human life, but in that time he could have, sold that slave that was given to him. But instead of, doing that and helping himself and his family with the proceeds from a sale like that, he decided to just set him free, which um
Good on Grant.
just amazing, amazing I can't think of the word, but just his character.
Hmm.
Um, you
Like I
know,
said, this guy deserves a movie. Him and I think Kennedy. I've been watching the mini series on History Channel, his documentary on Kennedy. I know everybody focuses on the assassination or um, but the life of these two is fascinating. But Grant, good job, buddy. Grant moved to St. Louis, taking on a partnership with Julia's cousin Harry Boggs, working in the real estate business as a bill collector, again without success, and at Julia's prompting, ended the partnership. In August, Grant applied for a position as a county engineer. He had 35 notable recommendations, but Grant was passed over by the Free Soil and Republican county commissioners because he was believed to share his father-in-law's Democratic sentiments. Don't tell anyone your politics in this day and age, or in that day and age, I guess. In April 1860, Grant and his family moved north to Galena, accepting a position in his father's leather goods business, Grant and Perkins, run by his younger brothers Simpson and Orville. In a few months, Grant paid off his debts. Sometimes you got to move home. You got to move home. You got to fucking do a hard reset on your computer, update, make sure it all works, make sure everything is good and done. He pays off his debts. The family attended the local Methodist church, and he soon established himself as a reputable citizen. And that is where we will end episode 1, part 1 of 3 of our Ulysses S. Grant series. There's much more hijinks to get into with old Hiram, much more for me to cackle on with Danger Zone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening. Do you have anything you want to add before we end this episode, sir?
yeah, there's a lot of information, side stories from different points in his life. We'll have to touch on a couple for some chuckles in the next episode. But yeah, this was good. Lots of lots of lots of fun and interesting things with Grant.
I agree, sir. I agree wholeheartedly.
And I
Um,
think getting into the Civil War is going to be pretty crazy.
I completely agree.
That alone
Um,
is a whole episode.
totally. And the Civil War, I mean, here we go, boys. I'm excited. I'm so fucking excited to talk about the Civil War with you because um like I said, this is what I was raised on, man. I grew up with a dad who was history man through and through, and I fucking this this was my first history obsession as a kid. And all boys grow up with a bit of a like a battlefield history kind of inkling, and um women too. I don't want to exclude anyone, any genders or anybody. But yeah, this is all fascinating shit. And please like us on Instagram, Zanzizi Podcasts at gmail.com. If you want to send an episode suggestion, you can join a Discord or click all the links in the description. Follow us, share with a friend. We love you. We'll see you next week. Have a great one. Yeah, dude.